The surgeon began the operation, but found something inside the patient that shouldn't have been there. When the patient discovered what it was, he was shocked. The night was dark, and the road seemed endless. Michael held the steering wheel firmly, his eyes heavy after an exhausting day at work. He wasn't a wealthy man, but he was proud of what he had achieved through hard work. He worked in a small mechanic's shop and always found a way to help his neighbors when he could. Despite the difficulties, he felt grateful for the life he had. The radio played an old song, and his mind wandered between exhaustion and memories of his childhood. He had grown up with adoptive parents who loved him. He sighed, pushing those thoughts away. He needed to concentrate on the road. Suddenly, lights appeared on the horizon as a car approached at high speed in the opposite direction. Michael opened his eyes in surprise. His heart raced and everything happened in a matter of seconds. He turned the steering wheel forcefully, trying to avoid the car, but the tires skidded on the wet asphalt. Everything spun around. The impact came like a blow to the chest, a deafening roar followed by the sound of metal bending. The glass shattered into 1,000 pieces, and he felt his body throw forward before everything went dark. The rain began to fall, mixing with the strong smell of gasoline and hot metal. Silence reigned for a moment, interrupted only by the sound of something dripping onto the crushed dashboard. Michael's chest rising and falling with difficulty, a sharp pain running through every part of his body. He tried to open his eyes, but his eyelids were heavy as lead. Everything was blurry and distant, and then everything went black. Shortly after, the sound of a siren cut through the night, approaching rapidly. Voices emerged amid the chaos, hurried footsteps. A hand touched his face gently, and he felt something warm slide down his forehead. "Blood! He's alive!" someone shouted. Michael tried to speak, but his mouth wouldn't respond. Fear began to spread in his chest. Something was wrong. He wanted to scream, to ask for help, to say he was there, that he could hear everything, but his body would not obey. The stretcher shook as they carried him to the ambulance. Lights flashed, casting strange shadows inside the vehicle. Time seemed to run and stop at the same time. He felt a needle in his arm and heard distant voices talking about his blood pressure and his breathing. Nothing made sense. Then a phrase crossed his mind like a cold knife. "He's very weak. We have to operate now. Speed up this ambulance." His heart leapt. He tried to move, to open his eyes, but the world around him was fading. Fear overwhelmed him. Darkness enveloped him completely, and his consciousness faded, taking with it any possibility of reacting. The hospital doors slammed open as the stretcher was pushed inside, the wheels sliding hurriedly across the bright white floor. The strong smell of disinfectant hung heavy in the tense air. Michael lay on the narrow mattress, his face pale, his chest rising and falling weakly and irregularly, his blood already staining the sheets, dripping onto the cold metal of the stretcher, leaving a red trail down the hallway. The machines emitted insistent alarms, while doctors and nurses exchanged quickly and urgently, knowing that time was against them. Dr. Daniel Ortega walked with firm steps, his eyes fixed on the monitor showing the patient's vital signs. Sweat began to bead on his forehead, not only because of the suffocating heat of the emergency room, but also because of the gravity of the situation. A piece of metal was piercing Michael's abdomen. Michael. It was a miracle he was still alive. His blood pressure was dropping rapidly, and the time to save him was shrinking with every passing second. "We have to operate now," Daniel ordered in a firm but urgent voice. The medical team already knew what to do, but there was still one obstacle: the consent forms. Michael was an adult, but he was unconscious. The decision was in the hands of his adoptive parents. Linda and Henry Ramirez arrived at the hospital minutes later. Their faces reflected despair. Their eyes were filled with tears. Linda was shaking so much that she could barely hold the pen to sign the documents. Her fragile Juanter struggled to complete the task. "He's going to be okay." Her voice was a thread of hope mixed with fear. "Daniel, don't lie. We can't. We'll do everything we can, Mrs. Ramirez. But we need to operate now." Henry pressed his lips together, trying to remain calm, but his eyes betrayed the fear he felt. He looked at Linda as if seeking strength in her, as if hoping that somehow the woman who had raised Michael with so much love would have the answer he didn't have. Linda swallowed hard. squeezed her husband's hand, and finally nodded, moving her head slowly as if that simple gesture of saying yes was the heaviest burden she had ever carried in her life. The papers were signed. Now, time was a double-edged sword. Daniel ran through the hallways while the team prepared the operating room. The sound of doors slamming echoed through the hospital. Inside the operating room, everything was ready. Masks tightened, gloves in place, instruments glistening under the intense light. The anesthesiologist did his part. The monitors showed unstable numbers. Michael's life was hanging by an invisible thread. "Let's begin," said Daniel, holding the scalpel firmly. Silence filled the room. Outside, Linda and Henry hugged each other. Their silent prayers mingled with the rapid beating of their hearts. The operating room was bathed in a cold, intense light. The glare of the spotlights highlighted every detail of Michael's pale body on the table. The silence was only interrupted by the constant sound of the cardiac monitors, showing increasingly unstable numbers, a cruel reminder that time was a relentless enemy. Dr. Daniel took a deep breath, adjusted his gloves, and looked at the team around him, each waiting for his next instruction. He had already performed dozens, perhaps hundreds of surgeries in his career, but this one felt different. The weight of that life in his hands, the desperate look on the parents' faces outside, the uncomfortable feeling that something else big was behind this story, but he couldn't be distracted by thoughts. Not now. Every second lost was one less chance to save this man. Scalpel. The sharp blade cut Michael's skin with precision, revealing the open wound. The metal pierced muscles and tissue cruelly, like a cold blade driven in without mercy. Blood flowed slowly, staining the white sheets under the body. Suction. A nurse quickly brought the tube closer, cleaning the area so he could see better. The silence in the room was almost sacred. Everyone knew that a single wrong move could be fatal. Daniel pressed his lips together, focusing all his attention on the metal embedded in the patient's abdomen. He had to remove it as carefully as possible. Any mistake, and he could perforate a vital organ. His hands were steady, but his heart was beating fast. He couldn't fail. The metal was deeper than it appeared, and removing it had to be a slow, careful, precise process. He held it firmly and began to pull, feeling the resistance of Michael's body, as if fate itself were fighting against him. "Strength, Michael. Hold on just a little longer," he whispered softly, almost without realizing it. The metal finally came out, and for a moment everything seemed to stop for a second of absolute silence, followed by the frantic sound of the monitors. The pressure was dropping. The heart was slowing down. He was slipping away. The anesthesiologist looked at Daniel urgently, already preparing the medication. The surgeon felt his chest tighten. He couldn't lose him now. He clenched his fists, sweat sliding down his forehead as he acted quickly. They had to stop the bleeding before it was too late. "Come on, pass me more gauze. Press here now." Their hands didn't stop. Time seemed to run fast than he could keep up with. The team's breathing was tense. Everyone held their breath as Daniel sutured the internal tissue with each stitch he made, saying that he was not only sewing Michael's flesh, but holding his life together with invisible threads that could not be broken. The monitors began to stabilize. Michael's heart continued to beat. Relief swept through the room, but no one celebrated yet. Dr. Daniel stepped back for a moment, breathing deeply. He looked at the patient's motionless face, wondering who he was, what his story was, what he would leave behind if he had not resisted. He knew nothing about this man except that for some reason, saving his life seemed more important than any other surgery he had ever performed. The final stitches were being placed, Michael's skin carefully closed after removing the metal. Every movement of the scalpel reflected the precision of years of experience of Dr. Daniel. The room remained in respectful silence, interrupted only by the rhythmic sound of the heart monitors, a sound that now felt like a small victory after the fight against time. Sweat trickled down the surgeon's forehead. The strain of the surgery weighed heavily on his shoulders, but the reassurance of seeing the patient's life stabilized gave him some peace. But then, something strange happened. The scalpel slipped across the skin, ready to close the last suture, but it hit something solid. Daniel frowned, his gaze fixed on the area he had just touched. He tried again more carefully, but the blade would not cut. There was something there, something that should not be there. The team around him noticed his hesitation. Glances were exchanged in silence. One of the nurses, curious, asked in a low voice, "Doctor," but Daniel didn't answer. His heart beat a little faster, and a shiver ran down his spine. It wasn't a fragment from the accident. It wasn't a bullet. It made no sense for it to be there. He picked up some forceps with steady but trembling hands and began to explore the area with the utmost care. He felt the metal tip of the object, something small but resistant. With all the delicacy that his profession demanded, he pulled gently until he had enough space to remove it. When the small object finally came out of Michael's body, a heavy silence fell over the room. Daniel opened his eyes in amazement. It was a medallion, dirty and corroded by time, but undoubtedly a medallion. How had it gotten there? The surgeon turned the object between his fingers, feeling the cold metal against his glove. There was something strange about it, something that made him feel inexplicably uncomfortable. He had seen many things in surgery, but nothing like this. "What is this?" he muttered, more to himself than to the team. The nurses looked at each other, not knowing what to say. There was no logical explanation for an object like that to be inside a man, inside his body, as if someone had put it there on purpose. Daniel felt a lump in his throat, a strange feeling that this was not just a surgical find, but the beginning of something much bigger, something for which perhaps even he was not prepared. The small medallion rested in Dr. Daniel's hands. The faint shine of the metal, corroded by time, reflected the cold light of the operating room. He blinked several times, trying to process what he was seeing, as if his mind refused to accept the strangeness of this discovery. The object was small and round, and seemed fragile, but its weight in the palm of his hand was surprising, as if it contained something much greater than just the material it was made of. The silence in the room grew heavier, and the team around him watched with curious eyes, but no one dared to say anything. The surgeon carefully cleaned the object with his fingertips, removing the traces of blood and remnants of Michael's body that were still stuck there. As he rubbed the surface, he noticed that the metal hid small engraved details that, although worn by time, could still be seen. It was an antique medallion, perhaps very old, and the question that pounded in the minds of everyone there was inevitable. How had it gotten inside that man's body? Daniel's heart was beating fast, not because of the exhaustion of the surgery, but because of the strangeness of the moment. He looked at Michael, still unconscious, breathing slowly and controlled by the machines. That man had no idea what was inside him, how long it had been there, since the accident, since his childhood. He closed his eyes for a second, trying to gather his thoughts. "This doesn't make sense," he murmured softly. The nurse at his side leaned in a little to get a better look. "It's a necklace, a medallion," she replied. Daniel, still turning the object between his fingers. He frowned. How could that have gotten inside him? Daniel took a deep breath. That was the question that wouldn't leave his mind. He had seen many strange things in medicine. Bodies that held unexpected secrets. Stories hidden in the bones and tissues of the people who came to that table. But a medallion inside a man? That was different. He looked at the team, all waiting for his reaction. But he knew he didn't have any answers to give yet. Whatever that object was, it didn't belong to him. It belonged to Michael. And somehow Daniel felt that when that man woke up, his life would never be the same again. Dr. Daniel held the medallion firmly, his gaze fixed on that small object that seemed to hold more secrets than anything else he had ever seen inside a human body. The operating room had already been cleaned. Michael was being taken to recovery, and the other doctors and nurses had continued with their routines. But Daniel couldn't simply forget what he had found. He needed to understand. With careful fingers, he tried to open the locket. At first, it wouldn't budge. The hinge seemed to have been sealed by time, but Daniel persisted, forcing it a little more until a slight click was heard. The locket finally opened, revealing what was inside. His heart leapt. A small photo, yellowed by time. His eyes scanned the image carefully. It was old, very old. The edge was worn, the surface marked by time, but the image was still clear enough to make out a woman holding a baby. Her expression was difficult to decipher. Her face wore something between love and sadness. as if that moment, frozen in time, were a farewell and not a beginning. The baby in her arms seemed too small, a newborn wrapped in a blanket. Daniel frowned, feeling a strange weight in his chest. Who was that woman? Who was that child? And more important, what connection did all this have to Michael? He turned the photo over carefully, and on the back, there was a message written in delicate handwriting, but already worn by time. Some letters were almost invisible, as if time had tried to erase those words. But Daniel managed to read them. "Forgive me, my love." His eyes remained fixed on the phrase, and a chill ran down his spine. Those words carried a pain he couldn't explain. He didn't know what that woman had done, or why she was asking for forgiveness, but he could feel that there was much more behind that photo than a simple portrait of mother and son. His gaze returned to Michael lying on the stretcher on the other side of the room. He had no idea what was inside him, what his own body had hidden for so long. But one thing was certain. When he woke up, his life would never be the same again. The hospital room was silent. The soft sound of the heart monitor was the only thing that broke the stillness of the environment. The evening light came in through the window, painting soft shadows on the white walls. The smell of alcohol and medicine filled the air, and the cold of the IV slowly ran down Michael's arm. Michael's arm, who was still asleep, oblivious to everything around him. His face was pale, his lips dry, his breathing slow and deep. His body, though motionless, was struggling to recover from the violence it had suffered. But then, a small movement. His fingers twitched slightly, as if they wanted to grab something invisible in the air. His eyes heavy as lead, trying to open, but the light made them close again. Inside his mind, everything was a tangle of confusing sensations, as if he had spent too long submerged in darkness. His chest rose and fell irregularly, and a shiver ran down his spine when he felt the warmth of the sun touching his skin for the first time in days. Slowly, his eyelids lifted. The light was strong at first, clouding everything around him, but little by little the contours of the room began to take shape. The white ceiling, the IV bag hanging beside him, the wires attached to his chest, and suddenly the weight of a body next to his bed. His eyes moved slowly until they found an image that, although blurred, warmed his chest. Linda, his mother, was holding his hand tightly, her eyes red from crying so much. "My son," her voice came out in a trembling whisper, as if she were afraid that if she spoke too loudly, he would disappear. Michael blinked several times, trying to get his bearings, but his head was throbbing as if it were about to explode. He opened his mouth and tried to speak, but his throat was dry. The words simply wouldn't come out. Linda got up quickly, touching his face gently, as if she needed to feel his skin to believe he was really there. Her wrinkled fingers traced his forehead and stroked a strand of hair as she held back her tears. "You came back to me, my son." Michael took a deep breath and closed his eyes for a moment, trying to organize his thoughts, but everything was blurry and distant. The last thing he remembered was his heart racing. "What happened?" His voice came out hoarse, almost unrecognizable. Linda exchanged a quick glance with Henry, who was on the other side of the bed in silence. The man looked tired, worn out by days of worry. He cleared his throat before speaking, trying to remain calm. "You had an accident, son." Michael frowned, his mind struggling to find any memory of that day, but all he had was a huge void. He tried to force the images, any detail that would help him remember, but nothing came. His heart began to beat faster, a strange anxiety growing inside him. "What accident? I don't remember anything." Linda squeezed his hand, trying to calm him down. "Don't worry about that now, my love. The important thing is that you're here, that you're back with us." But Michael couldn't ignore that suffocating feeling that something was wrong. He couldn't remember anything, not the road, the impact, his body being thrown against the steering wheel, and somehow that scared him more than if he could remember. On the other side of the room, leaning against the wall, Dr. Daniel watched the scene in silence. He knew this was only the beginning. He knew that sooner or later Michael would have to learn the truth. The accident was the least of his problems. What really mattered was still tucked away in the pocket of the surgeon's robe, a small medallion, and inside it, the only clue to a past that Michael never even imagined he had. Dr. Daniel waited until the room was silent, until the excitement of the reunion between Michael and his parents had calmed down a bit. He knew that this was a delicate moment, that he had to choose his words carefully, that he couldn't reveal all the information at once. But the truth was there, burning in his pocket, begging to be revealed. He took a chair and sat down next to the bed, resting his forearms on his knees, leaning slightly forward, his eyes analyzing Michael carefully, gauging how much strength he had regained to hear what he needed to tell him. "Michael, I need to show you something." The doctor's tone was calm, but it had a weight that made the atmosphere feel colder. Michael frowned, looking at him with confusion. His muscles were still weak, and his head was throbbing, but he realized from the doctor's look that something was wrong, something he didn't yet know. He swallowed, waiting carefully. Daniel reached into the pocket of his gown and took out the small medallion, opening his palm so that Michael could see it. The silence that followed was thick. Linda and Henry exchanged confused glances. Michael blinked several times, his eyes fixed on the object, not understanding what he should feel. He didn't recognize it. He had never seen it before, but for some reason a strange sensation ran down his back. "That's yours." His voice sounded tired. Daniel took a deep breath, looking him straight in the eye. "It was inside you, Michael. We found it during the surgery." The confusion on his face turned to pure shock. His chest rose and fell faster, as if his body knew that this discovery was important. Although his mind still couldn't process it, inside me, his voice almost broke. The doctor nodded with a slight nod. "Yes. When we operated, we found this medallion inside your body, near your abdomen, but it wasn't from the accident. It had been there for a long time." Michael opened his mouth to say something, but no sound came out. His eyes fixed on the medallion. He tried again to find some memory, anything that would explain it, but all he found was a void. "Michael, I've never seen this before," he said at last, his voice tinged with fear, as if he were trying to convince himself that it didn't make sense, that it couldn't be real. Daniel noticed the tension growing, but he knew it wasn't over yet. He turned the locket and carefully opened it. Before Michael's eyes, the small yellowed photo was there, the woman holding the baby. Michael opened his eyes wide, his fingers trembling slightly as he took the medallion from the doctor's hands. His eyes scanned the image over and over again, looking for something, anything that would bring back a memory, but nothing came. Nothing. Who is this woman? Dr. Daniel would have liked to have an answer, but he could only be honest. "I don't know, but there's something written on the back." Michael turned the photo with trembling hands and read aloud in a low voice, "Forgive me, my love." The silence in the room became heavier than before. Linda brought a hand to her mouth, her heart racing. Henry lowered his head, as if he felt that was more big than anyone could understand. Michael closed his eyes for a moment, feeling a suffocating knot in his chest. Something inside him told him that that phrase, that photo, that locket, all of it, was a piece of something he never knew he had lost. The locket rested in the palm of Michael's hand, and although it was small, it seemed to carry the weight of a lifetime. He stared at that photo, as if he expected that at any moment, a forgotten memory would emerge from the shadows of his mind and tell him the truth he never knew. But nothing came, only an immense, suffocating emptiness. His heart beat hard against his ribs, not out of fear, but out of an anguish he could not name. Linda and Henry watched. Henry watched in silence, feeling their son's pain as if it were their own. They knew that moment would come someday, but never imagined it would be so abrupt, bringing questions for which there may be no answers. Linda wanted to touch Michael's face and tell him that everything was okay, but she knew it wasn't. For the first time, she saw in her son's eyes a different kind of unease. Something that wasn't just pain from the accident or the difficult recovery. It was something else, something that had always been there but was now growing, taking up space, suffocating him. Michael took a deep breath, ran his hand over his face, and closed his eyes for a moment, as if trying to calm the storm inside him. Since he was little, he had carried a strange feeling, a void that he could never fill. His adoptive parents always treated him with love and gave him everything they could. They never hid from him that he was adopted, but there was something missing, an invisible piece he could never explain. "I always knew I wasn't from here." His voice came out low, almost a whisper. but laden with deep sadness. But I never imagined there was something so big, hidden inside me. Dr. Daniel crossed his arms, watching him attentively. You never knew anything about your biological family. No clues, no names, nothing about what happened before your adoption. Michael shook his head slowly, without taking his eyes off the photo. Nothing. My parents adopted me when I was very young. They never knew where I came from. They never knew who left me behind. I never knew and I never asked. Linda pressed her lips together, her eyes filled with tears. Son, we never hid anything from you, just that we never had any answers to give you. When you came to us, there were no records. There was nothing, just a baby alone in the world. Michael felt a lump in his throat. He always tried to ignore that part of his history. Always tried to convince himself that it didn't matter that his life was complete with the people who raised him. But now that little locket said otherwise. He ran his finger over the photo again, looking at the woman holding the baby. If she wrote, "Forgive me, my love," it means she regretted it. It means she didn't want to leave me. His voice broke at the end, and Linda felt her heart break when she saw the pain in her son's eyes. Henry took a deep breath and looked at him seriously. What do you want to do with this, son? Michael took a while to respond. He felt as if he were standing in front of a door that had always been closed inside him, and now someone was giving him the key. He could leave it closed and get on with his life without looking back. But something inside him, something stronger than any fear, told him that if he didn't open that door, he would never again have the courage to look back. He looked up, his gaze firm and determined. I need to know where I come from. I need to know who she was, Linda. She closed her eyes. For a moment, holding back the tears, she knew that day would come. He just didn't know it would hurt so much. Michael held the medallion tightly, as if he feared that if he let go, that fragile connection to his past would disappear forever. His eyes scanned the photo over and over, trying to find something that made sense, some detail, any clue his mind could cling to. But all he felt was a deep emptiness, a void that had always been there, but now seemed bigger, heavier. He looked at Linda and Henry, the parents who gave him everything, who raised him with love, who had been by his side his whole life. But he knew that this was a path he had to walk alone. Linda sensed the uneasiness in his son's eyes and took his hand tenderly, trying to convey reassurance, even though his own heart ached with fear of what was to come. Son, are you sure you want to get into this? And if it's a painful story, and if he couldn't finish the sentence, Michael understood. What if he discovered something he didn't want to know? What if that changed everything he had always believed? But he also knew that spending the rest of his life with that doubt would be even worse. I need it, Mom. His voice came out low but firm. I need to know who I am. Henry took a deep breath. Crossing his arms, trying to hide the worry growing inside him, he asked, Where do you plan to start? Michael looked at Dr. Daniel, who until that moment had been observing everything in silence. The doctor scratched his beard thoughtfully and then said calmly, That medallion was inside your body for years, which means that whoever put it there did so for a very strong reason. Someone wanted you to have it. Michael nodded slowly, feeling those words resonate within him. He looked back at the photo. That woman. His heart told him that she was the key to everything. He needed to find out who she was. Silence filled the room. Linda lowered her head, trying to hold back the tears. She felt as if she were losing her son, as if a part of him were drifting away, and she couldn't stop it. But she knew she couldn't hold him back. Henry sighed. He put a hand on Michael's shoulder. We are with you, son. No matter what happens, no matter what you discover, we will always be your family. Michael looked at them, feeling the love that always surrounded him, and that gave him strength. But he knew that this journey was his alone. He looked at the photo again and ran his fingers over the woman's face, as if he could feel her presence through the aged paper. Something inside him told him that this search would change his life forever, and he was ready for it. Doña Marta walked through the hospital corridors as she had done for so many years, her expert gaze taking in every detail around her. She had seen everything in this life. She had held trembling hands of patients fighting to live. She had dried the tears of families who had lost their loved ones. She had heard stories that no one else remembered, but nothing prepared her for what she would feel that day, when she picked up the folder with Michael's name on it. Ramirez. She felt a chill run up her spine. Her steady hands began to shake slightly, and her breath got stuck in her chest. The patient's file was there, clear before her eyes. The accident, the surgery, the object found inside him, the search for answers. But it wasn't that which made her shudder. It was the name Michael and the details of an abandoned baby. Something inside her screamed, as if a door in her memory had suddenly opened. She felt her heart beat faster, her eyes wide, as she leafed through the file again and again, looking for some explanation for that strange feeling. "I've seen this before." The phrase escaped her lips in a whisper, and the nurse beside her looked at her with surprise. "Are you all right, Marta?" Marta blinked several times, trying to compose herself. Her face, normally calm and serene, now showed the expression of someone who had just seen a ghost. "I need to check something." She walked away, ignoring the curious glances of her colleagues, her heart beating faster than it had in years. Her hurried steps took her to the hospital's archive room, a place where aged papers rested in metal drawers, where forgotten stories were kept like secrets, waiting to be discovered. She began to open drawers, her fingers sliding over the labels yellowed by time, looking for something she herself wasn't sure what it was, but her instinct screamed that it was close. Then she found it, her eyes fixed on a name written by hand on a worn piece of paper. She took the file, her hands shaking even more. She felt the air leave her when she read what was written. Michael, the same name, the same feeling, a baby found at the entrance to the hospital more than 20 years ago, wrapped in an old blanket, left in the cold of the early morning, without explanation, without a note, without a surname, and a small tag hanging from his chest, with a single word written in desperate handwriting. Desperate handwriting. Michael. Marta felt her legs give way and had to lean on the nearest table, her heart pounding in her chest, her eyes fixed on that piece of paper, as if it contained a forbidden secret. She swallowed hard, feeling the weight of that discovery take hold of her body. My God, it's him. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to hold back the tears that were beginning to form. So many years had passed, so many nights spent awake wondering what had happened to that baby. Now she was back in the same hospital where it all began, without knowingly carrying within her the only clue to the mystery of her life. She took a deep breath, wiped a single tear that slid down her cheek, and held the file more firmly. She needed to be sure. She needed to know the whole truth before saying anything, but deep down, she already knew. Michael's past wasn't lost. It was just waiting to be found. Doña Marta felt the weight of time as she reviewed the old files. The smell of old paper and dust permeated the air, and her trembling fingers flipped through the yellowed pages, each one carrying forgotten stories, lives that had passed through that hospital, and left only traces of ink on paper. The sound of metal drawers echoed in the silence of the record room, and her heart beat strongly in her chest, as if she knew she was about to find something that would change everything. She took out an old record book with a hard-worn cover and placed it on the table. Her hands ran over the pages filled with names, dates, and notes made by doctors and nurses who no longer even worked there. She searched line by line until suddenly her eyes stopped at a note in the middle of the page. Marta's breath got stuck in her throat. There it was. Newborn found at the hospital entrance without documents, name given by the team. Michael, no information about relatives, baby left inside a blanket. In good health, only a medallion was found with him. Martha's heart raced even faster. Was it him? Same Michael who was now upstairs, unaware that his past was hidden inside an old and forgotten file? But then something caught her attention next to the note. There was a name scribbled by hand, almost erased by time. Isabel Gonzalez. Marta opened her eyes in surprise. The name echoed in her head like a whisper from the past. Who was Isabel Gonzalez? Why was that name written there next to the baby's entry? She ran her finger over the old handwriting as if to make sure she was seeing correctly. She tried to remember if she had ever heard that name before, but she couldn't find anything in her memory. However, one thing was clear. That name was the missing piece. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to process it all. She knew that Michael was looking for answers. She knew that this was a truth he had a right to know, But she also knew that sometimes the past can be a dangerous place, full of hidden pains. She took a deep breath and closed the book carefully. He no longer had any doubts. Michael was not abandoned by chance. Someone left him there. Someone who one day had to make an impossible decision, and now, after so many years, the truth was beginning to emerge from the past like a secret that refused to remain buried. Michael held the paper where the name Isabel Gonzalez was written, his fingers clenching the paper force, as if that piece of paper, yellowed by time, were the only thing that connected him to the truth. His eyes scanned the handwritten letters, trying to find a hidden meaning, something that would explain why that name was next to his on the hospital record. But there was nothing, just a void that seemed to grow larger and larger. He looked at Linda and Henry, hoping that somehow they knew something, anything that could help him understand. But his parents' faces showed only confusion and concern. Isabel Gonzalez repeated the name, tasting it in her mouth, as if the sound of the words could bring back a lost memory. "Have you ever heard of her?" Linda shook her head slowly, her eyes filled with tears. "Never, son. We've never heard that name." Henry crossed his arms thoughtfully. "Could she be your biological mother?" A chill ran through his body. He didn't know how to respond. Something inside him stirred, a strange feeling, almost like an instinct telling him that this name mattered more than he could imagine. But who was she? Why had no one ever mentioned this before? And why was her name hidden in the records as if they didn't want anyone to find it? He closed his eyes for a moment. He took a deep breath. He felt he was close to something big, something that could change everything he had always believed about himself. But fear was also there. Dr. Daniel watched everything in silence. He knew Michael needed answers, but he also knew that the more he searched the past, the more questions would arise. Even so, he couldn't leave him alone in that search. "I can help you," said the doctor, breaking the silence. Michael looked up as Daniel crossed his arms thoughtfully. "I have access to old medical files and contacts in hospitals and civil registries. I can try to find some information about Isabel Gonzalez, maybe an address, a record, something that will lead us to her." Michael felt a mixture of hope and anxiety. He knew that from that moment on, his life would take a path of no return, but he could no longer ignore it. He needed to know. He looked at Daniel with determination. "I want to find that woman." The doctor nodded. "Then let's get started." Linda looked down and clenched her hands tightly. The fear she felt was different from the fear he felt when he was about to lose Michael in the hospital. It was the fear of losing his son because of a past he could not change. "Son, are you sure?" Michael took a deep breath, looked at his mother, and took her hand affectionately. "I love you. Nothing in the world will change that, but I need to know who I am." Linda swallowed her tears and closed her eyes tightly. Henry put a hand on her shoulder, trying to give her strength, but even he didn't know what awaited them. Dr. Daniel took his cell phone, opened a note, and wrote the name Isabel Gonzalez. "Let's see where this takes us." And so the search began. Days turned into weeks, and the search for Isabel Gonzalez became a silent obsession for Michael. With each new clue, a greater mystery appeared before him. Dr. Daniel checked hospital records, civil archives, and even churches, but finding information about this woman was like trying to hold sand in your hands. Linda and Henry watched their son with concern. He barely slept, spending hours staring at the locket, turning it between his fingers as if the object could somehow whisper the answers he so desperately needed. But then, a phone call changed everything. It was Daniel's voice on the other end of the line sounded different, heavier. "Michael, I found something." Michael's heart raced. He felt his breath stop. For a moment, what happened on the other end? The doctor took a deep breath. "Isabel Gonzalez. I found a grave with that name." The silence that followed was overwhelming. Michael stood still, holding the phone tightly, feeling a knot in his chest. Throughout the search, part of him had believed that in the end he would find a living woman, someone who could look him in the eye and tell him everything. But now, the past seemed to have been buried along with that name. He closed his eyes, trying to collect his thoughts. Where? In an old cemetery on the outskirts of town. It has been abandoned for years. Almost no one goes there. But there's something else. A chill ran through Michael. What was it? In the tomb registry was the name of her husband at the time she died. Michael's mind was spinning, trying to process it all. He knew that name could be the next step, the piece that would connect everything. But before anything else, he had to go to that tomb. He needed to see it with his own eyes. "Tell me the address. I'll go there." Dr. Daniel hesitated for a moment. "Are you sure?" Michael looked at the medallion in his hand. He kissed it tightly, as if he were about to walk through a door that could never be closed. "I have to do it on the other side." Daniel understood. "I'll see you there." Michael hung up the phone and stood motionless for a moment, feeling the weight of his decision. Linda entered the room with slow steps, looking at her son with sadness. "You found something, didn't you?" He didn't want to worry her anymore, but he couldn't lie to her either. "Yes." Linda's eyes filled with tears. "What are you going to do now?" Michael clutched the medallion in the palm of his hand. "I'm going to see it with my own eyes." And with that he left, not knowing that this visit to the cemetery would change everything he thought he knew about his own history. The cold wind blew through the abandoned cemetery, causing the dry leaves to dance on the dirt ground. The afternoon sun began to hide behind the clouds, staining the sky with orange tones and giving the place an even more somber air. Michael walked slowly among the old tombstones, some so worn by time that the names could no longer be read. His heart beat strongly in his chest, as if his body already knew that he was about to face something that would change his life forever. The Dr. Daniel walked beside him, holding a piece of paper with the notes he had obtained. He looked at the graves, trying to find the name that had brought them there. The silence between them was thick, laden with an expectation that neither of them could name, until suddenly Daniel stopped. "Here it is." Michael felt his legs tremble for a moment, before taking a few more steps. Then his eyes found the tombstone. The name was there, engraved in the cold stone, worn by time, Isabel Gonzalez. His chest tightened. He swallowed, feeling a lump form in his throat. With trembling hands, he knelt in front of the grave, his eyes scanning every detail. The stone was broken in some places. Moss grew around it, as if no one had visited that place in a long time. But what really made his heart race was the date. She died the same year he was left at the hospital door. Michael ran his hand over his face, feeling the tears burn in his eyes. This can't be a coincidence. Daniel crouched down beside him, looking closely at the gravestone. If she died the same year they found you, then maybe he didn't need to finish the sentence. Michael already knew what he meant. Maybe Isabel was his mother. Maybe she died shortly after leaving him at the hospital. Maybe she never wanted to abandon him, but had no choice. He felt a lump in his throat. He looked around at the empty cemetery, the silence broken only by the wind. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to imagine who that woman had been, what her voice sounded like, her smile, why she had to leave him behind. But then something made his body shudder, the feeling of being watched. He opened his eyes, and on the other side of the cemetery, he saw a man standing near a dry tree a little way off, wearing a dark coat and an old hat. He didn't move, he just watched Michael attentively. His gaze was heavy, almost inquisitive, as if he knew him, as if he knew why he was there. Michael felt a chill. Daniel, the doctor, looked in the same direction. "Who is that?" But before they could react, the man turned quickly and began to walk away with hurried steps between the gravestones. Michael's heart. "Hey, wait!" Without thinking, he jumped up and began to run after him. The man crossed the cemetery with quick steps, dodging the graves, disappearing among the dry trees. Michael tried to catch up with him, but his body had not yet recovered from the accident, and every step felt heavy, every breath an effort. "Wait, who are you?" But the man did not stop, and before Michael could get close, he disappeared among the trees like a ghost that should never have been seen. Michael stood there panting, feeling his heart pounding in his chest. Who was that man? And why did he run away when he saw Michael? Michael could still feel his heart pounding in his chest as he returned to the car with Dr. Daniel. The mysterious man had vanished as if he had never been there, but something inside him told him that this would not be the last time he would see him. Still out of breath, he took one last look at Isabel Gonzalez's grave before getting into the car. The question kept echoing in his mind. Who was she to him? Silence filled the road back, each lost in their own thoughts. Michael held the medallion tightly, staring out the window, trying to make sense of it all. If Isabel was really his mother, why had a man never shown up before? Why did no one look for him? And why did that man run away? When he saw him as they arrived in the city, Dr. Daniel stopped the car and handed Michael a piece of paper. This is the last registered address of Isabel's husband at the time of her death. If he's still there, he may have some answers. Michael took the paper, feeling an enormous weight in his hands. An address, a direction, something concrete amid so many unanswered questions. He looked at Daniel, who was watching him with a mixture of concern and hope. "Do you want me to go with you?" Michael took a deep breath, looking at the paper. "I need to do this." The doctor respected his decision and just nodded. Shortly after, Michael was already in front of the house. The place seemed to have stopped in time. An old building with peeling paint on the walls, closed windows, and a rusty iron gate that creaked with the slightest breeze. He looked around. The neighborhood was simple, the cobblestone streets almost empty, with few people walking. He approached the door and knocked several times. Nothing. He knocked again. Silence. He waited a few minutes, trying to hear some movement inside the house, but all he could hear was the wind blowing through the dry branches of the trees. The place seemed to be empty. For a long time, he walked around the house, trying to look through the windows, but the old curtains prevented him from seeing inside. Time seemed to have devoured that place, as if no one else lived there. But if the address was correct, that was the last place where the man who was once Isabel's husband had lived, and Michael needed to know if he was still alive. He looked to the sides and saw a lady sweeping the sidewalk of the house next door. He approached cautiously. "Excuse me, do you know who lives in that house?" The woman stopped for a moment. She narrowed her eyes as if trying to see his face better, and resumed sweeping without answering. "Ma'am, please. I just want to know if anyone still lives there." She didn't look at him. She just said in a low voice, "Go away, boy." Michael felt a chill. Why did she hesitate? She stopped sweeping for a moment, but then she simply turned around and went into her house, closing the door without saying anything else. Michael frowned. Something was wrong. He looked at another house and saw a man sitting on the porch, smoking a cigar. He approached him. "Good afternoon, sir. I'd like to ask you about the house next door. Do you know who lives there?" The man took a long, leisurely drag on his cigar and looked Michael up and down, and without saying a word, got up and went inside, closing the door behind him. Michael looked around, noticing that some people on the street were also avoiding his gaze. He felt a knot in his stomach. Why did no one want to talk? Why were they avoiding conversation? He returned to the front of the house, looked at the closed windows and the locked door, and felt his breathing become agitated. That place was hiding something, and he was determined to find out what it was. Michael stood in front of the house with his fists clenched at his sides. The heavy silence around him only increased his frustration. No one wanted to talk. No one even wanted to look at him. But why? What was that place hiding? The cold afternoon wind made the branches of the dry trees move, casting twisted shadows against the peeling walls of the house. Every detail seemed to scream that this place had been forgotten by time, abandoned as if no one wanted to remember that it was once inhabited. But Michael couldn't just leave. Not now. He looked around to make sure no one was watching him. The neighborhood seemed to have been left behind in the past, and the few people who passed by on the street avoided looking him in the eye. He took a deep breath, ignoring the uncomfortable feeling in his chest, and pushed the rusty iron gate. The creak echoed in the air, making the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. He climbed the porch steps with slow, hesitant steps, stopping in front of the door. He knocked again. Nothing. He waited, feeling the seconds pass slowly. No one. Then, without thinking, he turned the knob. It was locked. His heart raced. He felt his breathing become heavy. His instinct screamed that he had to go in. He had to see with his own eyes what that house was hiding. He looked around again to make sure no one was nearby and walked to the side of the house. The windows were closed, but one wooden window was too old, with one of the boards almost loose. He pushed it carefully, and the wood gave way with a dry creak. An impulse made his chest vibrate. He hesitated for just a moment, then took a deep breath and opened the window. The smell of dust and dampness hit him immediately. The air was thick and heavy, as if this house had been forgotten long ago. Michael climbed down from the windowsill and looked around, trying to get used to the dim light. The wooden floor creaked under his feet with every step. The silence was absolute. He walked slowly through the room. The furniture was covered in dust. Some chairs were overturned, a table with marks from glasses that seemed to have been there for years. There were pictures on the wall, but the glass was broken, and the images behind them were blurred by time. Michael ran his fingers over an old sideboard, feeling the dust stick to his skin. And then, suddenly he felt something strange. A chill ran down his spine. He knew this place. His heart began to beat faster. His breathing became irregular. It was impossible he had never been there before. He had never seen that house. But somehow every step he took felt familiar. Every smell, every detail of the peeling walls. A memory hidden in some corner of his mind, trying to surface, but refusing to reveal itself completely. He brought his hand to his forehead, feeling a slight dizziness. His eyes scanned the room, searching for something that would explain that feeling. Then his feet stopped in front of a dark hallway. Something inside him told him that there the answers were. Fear tried to stop him, but the need to understand was stronger. He took a deep breath, swallowed hard, and moved forward, delving even deeper into the mystery of that house forgotten by time. Michael's footsteps echoed in the dark hallway, every creak of the wooden floor sounding louder in that suffocating silence. The smell of dust and something old permeated the air, making his breathing become heavier. He didn't know what he was looking for, but he knew he had to keep going. He felt deep in his chest that this house held something important, something that would change everything. When he reached the end of the hallway, he found a door ajar. He pushed it open carefully, and the dry creak of the hinges broke the silence. The room was small and simple, the furniture covered with a dusty sheet, but what caught his attention was a dark wooden trunk in a corner, half hidden behind an old chair. His heart beat faster. He knelt in front of the trunk, running his hand over the lid, feeling the rough texture of the wood marked by time. With trembling hands, he lifted the lid little by little. Dust rose into the air, and he coughed slightly before he could see what was inside. Letters, dozens of them, all yellowed by time, some with torn edges. With the ink already beginning to fade, he took one between his trembling fingers and read what was written on the envelope. My son, Michael. His lungs seemed to close up. The air simply wouldn't come. He took another letter and another. They were all addressed to him. His chest rose and fell with difficulty. Who had written that? Who, during all those years, had kept letters for him without ever sending them? With trembling hands, he opened the first one. The paper was thin and fragile. He unfolded it carefully, revealing beautiful but suffering, as if each word had been written with tears held back in the eyes. My son, I know you will never read this, but I need to write. I need to feel that somehow I can talk to you. Every day without you is a pain that I cannot explain. I love you more than anything in this life, and I hope that someday you can forgive me. The letters began to blur before his eyes. His hands clenched the paper tightly, trying to contain the whirlwind of emotions that threatened to sweep him away. He opened another letter. Today, I saw you from afar. You were still such a small baby, so innocent. I wanted to run to you, hug you, and never let you go. But I can't. If only you knew the danger that lurks, you would understand why I had to leave you. But I never stopped loving you. Never. Michael's breathing began to fail. His chest felt like it was going to explode. His mother, Isabel, was his mother. She never wanted to abandon him. She was protecting him from something or someone. He felt hot tears running down his face as he opened another letter, and then another. Each word was a piece of the truth that had been taken from him. Each sentence was a confession of pain, love, and regret. And then, in one of the last letters, he found the answer he feared most. I know he's going to find me. I know I don't have much time left, but at least I have the certainty that you are safe. If one day you discover the truth, if one day you know who I am, I want you to know that I loved you every day of my life. Michael closed his eyes, trying to hold back the tears that burned his throat. Isabel knew she was going to die, and yet all she wrote about was the love she felt for him. The box of letters was still full, but Michael could no longer read anymore. He covered his face with his hands, feeling his body tremble as if he had finally found what he had spent his whole life searching for, and at the same time, he had lost something he could never get back. His mother loved him. She never abandoned him. But then who was he running from? Michael felt his chest tighten, his breathing heavy. The letters still trembled in his hands. He had reread Isabel's words so many times that he already knew every sentence by heart. His mother never wanted to abandon him. She loved him. She protected him from something or someone. The silence of the house seemed to scream in his ears. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to process it all, but a sound outside made him freeze. Quick, uncertain footsteps. His heart raced. He got up slowly, his eyes fixed on the half-open door. He felt he wasn't alone. A chill ran down his back. That's when he saw him in the doorway, standing in the shadow of the hallway. It was the man from the cemetery. Michael didn't move. His chest rose and fell rapidly. The man looked at him with a strange expression, loaded with something he couldn't decipher. He had a sparse beard, and a face marked by time and guilt. This time, he didn't run away. He just took a deep breath and broke the silence. "I'm Ernesto." Michael frowned. That name meant nothing to him, but then immediately came the confession that made his blood run cold. "I'm your father." The words fell like a crushing weight on Michael. He felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. His head spun, and the air seemed to vanish from the room. It couldn't be true. It couldn't be. "You're lying, Ernesto." He lowered his gaze. His shoulders slumped as if he had been carrying decades of regret on them. "I wish I were lying, but I'm not." Michael felt a wave of rage rise up in his chest. His hands clenched into fists. "My mother ran away from you. She had to hide me because she was afraid." Ernesto closed his eyes for a second and took a deep breath. "I know." The silence was deafening. Michael wanted to scream. He wanted to run out of that house. He wanted to erase everything he was hearing, but he stood there, rooted to the spot, waiting for the truth that had always been hidden from him. Ernesto looked at him with tired eyes full of regret that no longer fit inside him. "I didn't want a child. Not at that time. I was a bad man. Michael did bad things. He treated your mother like no one should be treated. She ran away because she knew I wasn't going to change. She did the right thing." Michael felt tears burning in his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. "You destroyed her life." The man swallowed hard, his gaze full of pain. "I know." Michael clenched his fists and trembled. "And now what do you want from me?" Ernesto hesitated for a moment, as if afraid of his own answer. "I just want to ask for forgiveness." Time seemed to stand still. Michael felt the world spinning too fast, as if he were being dragged into an endless void. His heart told him to leave, to never see that man again. But at the same time, part of him didn't know what to do. He looked at Ernesto, feeling a whirlwind of emotions he couldn't sort out. Could he forgive him? Could he forgive a man who destroyed his mother's life? Michael took a deep breath. His chest hurt. He had to choose. Michael felt his chest heavy, his eyes fixed on the man in front of him, a man who claimed to be his father, but seemed like a stranger to him. The pain, the rage, the confusion was spinning inside him like an uncontrolled hurricane. But then, in the midst of that storm of feelings, his gaze fell again on the box of letters. He felt a knot in his heart. There was something there. With trembling hands, he returned to the box and began to rummage through the letters as if his life depended on those forgotten words. It was then that he saw a notebook at the bottom. The cover was worn, the spine cracked by time, the pages yellowed. He picked it up carefully, feeling a chill when he saw the name written on the first page. Isabel Gonzalez, his mother's diary. His hands clutched the notebook to his chest. For a moment he closed his eyes, feeling an emotional weight so great that he could barely breathe. Then he slowly turned the first page. "My son, I write because it is the only way I can continue breathing. I write because I feel that every day without you is an open wound, a void inside me that never closes. I write because deep down I still have hope that one day you will know the truth." Michael ran his hand over his face, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to fall. Every word was a piece of pain, every sentence a silent cry of love and longing. "I never wanted to leave you, my love, but I had no choice. I was afraid. Afraid of the man who was supposed to protect us. Afraid of what might happen to you if I stayed. Running away was the only way to save you. He was gasping for air. Michael swallowed hard, and I slowly faded away like a candle that burns to the end, but still dreams of lighting up one last time. Michael clutched the diary tightly. The pain in his mother's words was almost unbearable to read, but he had to go on. Then, on the last page, he found a different letter. The words were shorter, as if they had been written in a hurry, or perhaps with the last strength of someone who knew they had no more time. My son, if you ever find this, I need you to know that I always loved you. There was never a single day that I didn't think of you. There was never a night that I didn't dream of hugging you. Michael ran his fingers over the words, as if he could feel his mother there in that moment. When you were born, you had an umbilical hernia. The doctor said he would perform the surgery, but I begged him. I asked him to leave something inside you, something that would bind me to you forever. The medallion, my little amulet, my last hope, my eternal love. The tears finally fell, heavy and burning on Michael's face. Michael, if you found this, my son, it means that there is still a part of me with you, that somehow we managed to find each other, even after so much time. And if that happened, if you are reading these words, I want you to know that I never stopped loving you. The last line was blurred, as if tears had fallen on the paper. Forgive me, Michael. He closed his eyes, hugging the diary to his chest, as the crying broke his soul. His mother never abandoned him. She fought, she suffered, and in the end, all she wanted was for him to know that he was always loved. Ernesto remained silent, watching break down at his mother's words. His eyes reflected guilt, but he knew there was nothing he could say to ease the pain he had caused. Michael took a deep breath, trying to calm his crying and sort out his feelings. He felt whole and broken at the same time, and then he understood his answer. It no longer mattered who Ernesto was. It no longer mattered what he wanted, because deep down in his heart, he already knew that the only person who ever mattered was no longer there. Michael couldn't contain the weight of the emotions tearing at his chest. Tears fell uncontrollably, hot and heavy, carrying with them years of silence, unanswered questions, an emptiness he couldn't even name until that moment. He held the diary tightly, as if it were the only thing keeping him from completely breaking down, as if those words were the only real connection he had to his mother. A sob escaped his throat, and he didn't try to stop it. The crying came from a deep place of pain, accumulated throughout a lifetime. He cried for the mother he never knew, for the woman who fought so hard to protect him, and who died without knowing if he was okay. He cried for the nights she spent alone, writing letters that were never delivered on, dreaming of a reunion that never happened. His shoulders shook, and the air seemed insufficient. Ernesto stood there, not knowing what to do. He had never seen a man cry like that. He had never seen so much pain in a single glance, and he knew it was his fault. She loved you more than anything in this world. She couldn't bear to live without you. She got sick quickly, said Ernesto, but his voice sounded weak, insignificant in the face of everything. Michael looked up, his eyes red, his breathing heavy, and you took that away from him. Ernesto lowered his head, defenseless. He knew it was true. Michael closed his eyes, trying to regain control, trying to breathe despite the crushing pain in his chest. But in the midst of all that sadness, something began to change inside him. For the first time in his life, he knew who he was. For the first time, understood why he had always felt that something was missing. He had spent his whole life without knowing what he was looking for, carrying an absence whose origin he did not know. Now he finally had an answer. He took a deep breath, feeling the air enter his lungs as if he were being reborn. Ernesto watched him, waiting for his reaction, waiting for a condemnation he knew he deserved. But Michael didn't want to spend any more of his energy on that man. His past wasn't there. His past was in that locket, in those letters, in his mother's words. He stood up slowly, his knees still weak, his chest still heavy. He looked at Ernesto one last time. Ernesto, I spent my whole life looking for something without knowing what it was. But now I know. Ernesto hesitated, his voice trembling. And what are you going to do with that? Michael took a deep breath and wiped the tears from his eyes with the sleeve of his shirt. I'm going to move on. He turned around, holding the diary against his chest, and walked out the door, leaving Ernesto alone with his regret. He didn't look back. Michael walked slowly, the diary still clutched to his chest, as if it were a shield against the whirlwind of feelings that consumed him. Every step seemed to weigh tons. His mind screamed, remembering every word he had read, every pain he had felt, every truth that had been taken from him without giving him a choice. But then, behind him, a sound, a low, muffled sough, stopped him. He closed his eyes, trying to ignore it, trying to just keep going, but deep down, he knew he couldn't. He turned slowly. Ernesto was there, kneeling on the floor, his face covered by his hands, his body shaking with sobs, and his voice came out in a broken whisper filled with guilt and despair. "Forgive me, son." Michael felt a chill run down his spine. The weight of those words hit him like a punch in the stomach. He wanted to hate that man. He wanted to scream at him. He wanted to push him away. He wanted him to feel every bit of the pain he had caused Isabel and him. But at the same time, there was a broken man aged not only by time, but by guilt. Ernesto was no longer the monster Isabel feared. He was just a broken old man, carrying a past he could not change. Michael looked at the medallion in his hand. His chest tightened. His mother had spent her entire life dreaming of finding, only wishing that he knew that he was loved. She left no hateful letters. She did not ask for revenge. She did not harbor resentment. Everything she wrote was love, and he could do the same. His whole body was shaking. He felt like he was on the edge of an abyss where a single decision would define the rest of his life, to forgive or not to forgive. He looked at Ernesto, that man who once was strong and cruel, but now was kneeling there in front of him, waiting for judgment. The silence weighed heavily between them. Michael took a deep breath, feeling the air enter his lungs, as if it were the last time. His heart ached. The answer was there, and with his hands clutching the locket, he made his decision. Michael felt his heart beating fast, as if each beat were a cry inside his chest trying to guide him towards the right answer. But there was a right answer. His body was shaking, his mind was spinning. The weight of that choice was immense. He looked at Ernesto, still kneeling, still crying, waiting for a word, a gesture, anything other than silence. Michael wanted to hate him. He wanted his mother to be there. He wanted none of this to have happened. He wanted his story had been different, but it wasn't. The past couldn't be changed. He closed his eyes. For a moment, he took a deep breath and felt Isabel's last words echo in his mind. "If you ever find this, my son, you should know that I always loved you." And then he knew what he had to do. His chest still hurt. His breathing was still irregular, but before he could think too much, his feet moved on their own. He slowly walked over to Ernesto. The man still had his face hidden between his hands, his shoulders shaking with heavy sobs. Michael stopped in front of him, and for a moment stood motionless, looking at this man who carried so many mistakes, so many bad decisions, so much weight from a life that he himself had destroyed. Michael took a deep breath, and then he knelt down, too. Ernesto looked up, confused, his eyes red and wet, unable to believe what he was seeing. Michael felt a lump in his throat, but before he could hesitate, before pride or anger could speak louder, he simply did what he felt he had to do. He hugged him. At first, it was a hesitant, shaky, uncertain hug, but Ernesto collapsed, his body surrendering to the embrace as if he had been carrying the weight of the world. And for the first time, someone was taking some of that burden off his shoulders. He cried like a child, his arms squeezing Michael tightly, as if he were afraid that he would disappear at any moment. "Forgive me, son," Ernesto repeated, his voice broken, almost unrecognizable. Michael closed his eyes, and tears fell silently down his face. "I'm not doing this for you." His voice came out low, trembling but firm. "I'm doing it for her." The embrace lasted long seconds, long enough for Michael to realize something. His heart still hurt. It would always hurt. But for the first time, he felt that the pain was transforming into something different. The past was there, marked into his skin, into the scars he carried in his soul. But the present was still in his hands, and the future was still his to choose. Michael walked slowly through the cemetery, holding the box with Isabel's letters and diary against his chest. The wind blew cold, stirring the dry leaves that were scattered on the ground. The sky was cloudy, and the smell of damp earth filled the air, as if the whole world were silent, waiting for that moment. Each step felt heavy, but he kept going, feeling in his heart that this was the right thing to do. He passed rows of aged gravestones until he finally stopped in front of the one with the name that changed his life forever. Isabel Gonzalez. He stood there quietly, looking at the cold stone, worn by time. He touched the rough surface with his fingers, feeling the weight of the years that had separated them. His eyes filled with tears. But this time, they were not tears of pain, but of longing. Longing for something he had never experienced. Longing for the mother he had never known, but who, in some way, had always been with him. He knelt slowly and placed the box on the grave, running his hand over the diary and the pile of letters that Isabel had written, without knowing if they would ever be read. "I read everything, Mom." His voice came out low and trembling, but full of love. "I know you never wanted to leave me. I know you did what you did because you loved me." He took a deep breath, closing his eyes. For a moment, feeling the cold breeze touch his face. "I spent my whole life feeling that something was missing. Now I understand. It was you." Tears began to fall, sliding silently down his skin. "But I found you." He looked at the tombstone, his eyes full of tears but with a new sparkle. "I found you, Mom." He stayed there for a moment in silence, just feeling her presence around her. The pain was still there. It would always be there. But at that moment, she realized that the emptiness she had always felt no longer hurt like before. She dried her eyes, took a deep breath, and with one last caress on the grave, she stood up. The cycle was complete, and now she could finally move on. Time passed, but something inside Michael had changed forever. The pain of loss was still there, but now it was no longer a weight that pulled him back. It was a memory, an invisible thread that connected him to the love of his mother, giving him the strength to carry on. For the first time, he felt that he was no longer lost. He knew who he was. He knew where he came from, and he knew what he had to do. He began visiting orphanages, sitting next to children who looked at the world with the same doubt he had carried for so long. He listened to their stories, their fears, their unanswered questions, and, more than anything else, he offered them hope. "I didn't know where I came from either," he said, holding the small hand of a child who, like him, was once looking for a place in the world. But the truth always finds a way out. You are never really alone. Every time he saw eyes shining with hope, he felt that his mother was there with him. Every time he helped someone find themselves, he felt the wounds of his own past heal a little more. The medallion that had been inside him for so many years never left his chest again. He wore it there, hanging from a thin chain, feeling its soft weight on his skin. Skin, now he knew what it meant. It was his mother's last gift, a symbol of the love that never ceased to exist, even when all seemed lost. One day, as he watched the sunset, he felt the light breeze ruffle his hair. He brought his hand to the medallion and closed his eyes, breathing deeply. "Thank you, Mom." Life went on, and now for the first time, Michael was ready to live it. Michael knew he could never change his past, but he could do something for the future of other children who, like him, grew up without knowing where they came from. The idea came to him like a whisper in his heart, a need he could no longer ignore. He knew the pain of feeling lost, of not having answers, of carrying an emptiness that no one could fill. But now he knew that no one should face that alone. Over time, the foundation began to take shape. Michael devoted every day, every effort, to building a place where children without families could find more than just a roof and food. There they would find stories like their own, people willing to help them understand that they were not just blank pages, that they had an origin, a name, a past to be discovered. He began to visiting orphanages, talking to each child, listening to their fears and silent promises. Every lost gaze, every unanswered question was a reflection of the child he had once been. But now he could do something. Now he could be the voice he once needed to hear. One day, as he walked through the corridors of the newly opened shelter, he felt a small touch on his hand. He looked down and found a child with big, frightened eyes holding his hand tightly. Michael knelt down to get to his level, feeling his little fingers clinging to his as if he were holding something valuable, something he didn't want to let go of. "Are you afraid?" he asked in a soft voice. The child didn't answer immediately, just looked at the floor and shook his head slightly. "I know how you feel," Michael continued, "but you're not alone." The boy looked up, and for a brief moment, Michael saw his own reflection in his eyes. The same emptiness, the same desire to belong. Michael smiled and squeezed his hand affectionately. "You'll always have someone here." The boy took a deep breath, and for the first time, smiled back, still shy, but full of hope. At that moment, Michael knew that his story was not over. It was just beginning in a new, different way. This time, he was not only looking for answers for himself, he was helping others find theirs. The foundation was growing every day, and with it, Michael felt that his mother's memory was becoming more alive. Every child who walked through those doors had in their eyes the same uncertainty that he had felt for so long. But by finding a home, a hug, a name, they also carried a piece of Isabel's story, because each of them was proof that the love she left behind was not in vain. Michael made sure to get to know each child, to listen to their stories, to showing them that they didn't have to be afraid. Some arrived without saying a single word, only with distrustful looks and closed hearts. Others asked if they would ever meet their families, if they had been forgotten, if they belonged somewhere. He responded with patience and affection, with the certainty that no one should grow up without knowing who someone loved you, even before you were born, he would say, taking those small, trembling hands in his, and that love never disappears. It always finds a way to reach you. And so Isabel's story spread, not as a sad memory, but as a flame that warmed hearts that had once been left out in the cold. One afternoon, Michael went out into the foundation's garden and stood silently watching the children play. Laughter echoed through the space. Little feet ran barefoot across the grass. Lives that were once lost now found a new beginning. He closed his eyes and inhaled deeply, feeling the gentle wind caress his face. Then he looked up at the sky. The sun was beginning to set, staining the clouds with golden and orange tones. He felt a slight lump in his chest, but it wasn't pain. It was something lighter, more pure. Do you see this, Mom?" His whisper was lost in the wind, but he knew he didn't need an answer, because deep the bottom of his heart, he felt her was there. Not in a cold grave, not in a distant memory, but in every child who found a home, in every hug he gave, in every gaze that shone with hope. He smiled, bringing a hand to the medallion that hung from his chest. "Thank you for never leaving me." The wind blew harder strong, ruffling his hair like an invisible caress. Michael closed his eyes and smiled. He knew his mother would always be there, watching over him. Time passed, and Michael learned that some pains never completely disappear. They remain there, in some corner of the chest, like a scar that sometimes burns, sometimes tightens, but also teaches. He realized that absence would never go, that he would always miss the mother he never got to hug, the words he never got to hear directly from her mouth, the time they could never get back. But the pain that once choked him now had a new meaning. It turned into love. Every child who came into the foundation, every look that found hope, every smile that emerged after being hidden for so long was proof that Isabel had not been forgotten. His love had endured the years. It had endured the silence. It had endured the absence. And now it lived there, in the new life that Michael had decided to build. He learned that the past cannot be changed, but the present can be written with new stories, with new possibilities. He found purpose where before there had only been emptiness. He found answers where before there had only been questions. And above all, she found peace. One morning, she was walking through the open fields near the foundation, feeling the light wind touch her face. The sky was clear blue, and the sun was shining gently, warming her skin. She brought her hand to her chest and held the medallion, the same medallion that had been with her since the day she was born. She looked at the aged metal, feeling its familiar weight against his skin. He smiled. Life went on. The past could not be erased, but the present was in his hands. He no longer needed to search for something that had always been within him. He let out a long sigh and closed his eyes. For a moment, feeling the warmth of the sun on him, he then took a step and moved on. And now, I want to know from you what you would have done in Michael's place, Michael. Would you have forgiven Ernesto, or would you have left the past behind without looking back? And if you were in Isabel's place, would you have made a different decision? Leave it here in the comments. I read them all, and don't forget to activate the bell to receive our upcoming videos, because every week there are exciting stories like this one that make us reflect on life and what really matters. And since you've come this far, I'm sure that this other story that is appearing on the screen now will touch your heart. This video has already made many people cry and rethink their decisions. Click now and watch it.